I want to talk the next 20 minutes or so about the impact, as we observe it, on operations teams within the, in this case, given where we're at, the mobile operator. But it's probably fairly general for any large service provider. We have been, over the last probably 2 to 2.5 years, seeing a good deal of success working with operator customers in deploying NFV-based solutions. So what we mean by that is working with those customers to provide a virtualization layer across their network infrastructure so they can start to roll on top of that individual applications, VNFs, network functions. Most of that success and most of the traction is happening in the mobile core. So mobile is certainly where we're seeing the majority of the deployment. Today, we've got something like 45 or more active NFV deployments out there. By active, I mean these are commercial operations. So if you're wondering whether NFV is real, I can assure you it definitely is. It's been there. We've had our first customer deployed, I think, at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. So since then, we've seen a number of customers who are running this kind of approach in their network today, over 80 million subscribers, paying customers on NFV-based services. So it is real, but it's not easy. And we've learned some experiences from those deployments. Just quickly, why are we doing this in the first place? Well, this might sound a fairly obvious thing, but I think there are a lot of implications that we can take from this. If we look at what we used to do in the past, we used to buy technology in large lumps. So we would spend time analyzing markets, looking at evaluating potential options for service types, and then we would go through a procurement process and buy a large amount of equipment to deploy a service. The problem with that approach is, aside from the fact that it's rigid and it's not very flexible in itself, it also means it's very difficult to match revenue to costs. So you have a situation where you either deploy early and you have stranded capacity in your network, or you deploy late and you risk upsetting customers or not winning new business, or you hit it just right, which is very unlikely. So it's a very difficult model, and we need to try and fix it. And the way to fix it is, obviously, NFV is one of those approaches where we can start to smooth that curve out, so you can expand your environment as your services expand. And it's not just for one service, but for any service. It's one platform you can expand across all services. So that leads me to, how do you deploy the technology? Again, if you think about the business case, you're looking to gain the benefits of a common platform across your entire business function. If you look on the left here, the old manner might be to simply say, let's just virtualize a service. If you do that, you will save a modicum of cost. If you create a virtual stack around a service in the center there, you build an entire operational model around one service feature, and it's on a virtualized platform. Again, you will save a degree of cost. You'll actually save a reasonable amount of cost when you do that, because you get the benefit of using commodity hardware. But it's a one-off cost. You don't get any real operational benefit. The model that we propose and the model that our customers are operating is what we call a common platform. A common platform, by that we mean it will run any vendor application on top, so any VNF if you like, but also work across any domain. So it will work for mobile applications in the mobile core, it'll work in a fixed line environment, it'll work in an IT environment. And that's really where you generate the maximum benefit from NFV. If you can deploy a common platform across those environments and run your entire operations on that platform, your whole business value or your whole business benefit increases tremendously. We did some work with ACG Research on this, and what they found was, by taking this common platform approach, due purely to the operational implications of it, we can separate the rising cost of operating your infrastructure from the rise in traffic running over it. If you simply take a piece of infrastructure and virtualize it, you get a drop in cost, but that cost increases one for one as your traffic goes up. And one of the compelling drivers, as we all know in this space, is to try and manage ever-increasing amounts of traffic without taking a hit on the operational cost. So separating the growth of traffic from the growth of operating cost is a key value of a common platform. In our case, we can talk about VCloud NFV. You can come over to the booth and we'll go into it in great depth. So I'm not going to cover it here in any detail, just simply to put it out there as the solution that we're talking about specific to VMware. So what I'm going to talk about from here is very much based on that platform component, the virtualization layer that sits between your underlying hardware and the services you're running. And within that, there is a high degree of operational requirement that I will talk about. Then later, we've got some panelists that are going to expand that conversation outside of the platform, above it and below it. But we're looking, or I'm looking at the moment, specifically within the virtualization layer, the virtualized compute, networking, and storage. So we've looked at the technology has changed, what you deploy has changed, but also the business environment you're operating in has changed. The traditional telco environment of, let's say, 10 years ago, just to be safe, because I know it's changing rapidly. But we're going from an environment where telcos used to run what I call cash cow services. You'd have 4 or 5 or a small number of very large services that you would run in silos typically, and you would sell those to as many people as possible. So within your entire audience, there'd be a sweet spot, large enterprise, SMB, consumer, whatever it was. But the platform was tuned, if you like, to one real target market, and then you try and sell it to as many other markets as you could. But it was really, a few services that were trying to have a very broad appeal, and they were fairly static. Now the business has changed completely. We're now trying to produce many services, or services that look very personal to the consumer, whether that consumer is a business user or a social user. So we're looking to try and deliver personalized services, many services, and we're looking to change those rapidly. So the business requirement has changed significantly, and that has an implication on how you operate networks and what operations needs to deliver to the business in order to operate in this new business environment. The other thing that I would say needs to change and has to change to really get success from NFV is the way services are acquired, are procured, and then evolved. Again, in the traditional sort of RFX approach, you would look at investigating a service opportunity, you'd define that opportunity, you'd go through a procurement process, a vendor analysis, you'd do some deployment testing, you may pick a dual vendor strategy, and then you build the service and try and run it for 4, 5, 6 years. And then you'd go back and do the same thing again. We're now moving to an environment where we're building the platform, and then that platform is undergoing constant evolution. Or at least the services running on it are undergoing constant evolution. So you need to be able to think more in terms of fast fail than long-term planning. Yeah? So if something looks good, you should be able to try that. If it works, you stick with it, and you maybe allocate more resource as the load rises. If it doesn't look good, you switch it off, and you haven't spent a lot of money doing it. But for that sort of model to work, you have to have a very automated, a very clear operating process, and it's really moving from what we might think of as NetOps to this DevOps environment of continual evolution. So your marketing team can come up with a great idea based on some customer research, and you can deliver that as a service within a matter of weeks or days or even instant. You can maybe give the option to the customer to control it. So it's a very different operational environment that has to be achieved in order to deliver that kind of capability back. And it's very much this cyclic, evolving, continuous evolution rather than long-term planning. So that's another factor that's feeding the operations transformation. So going back to the beginning there, we started off with some silos of hardware, and we're now saying we're going to put in a horizontal platform. And on that platform, we're going to put on our workloads, be they mobile core, fixed line, IT services, whatever they may be. Now, if we've deployed the common platform like that, we need to align to it. At the moment, we're probably more aligned to the silos of technology that we deployed. We now need to get from those silos into a new model. So what do we put in the bottom right corner to solve the problem? How do we model operations to solve these new technical challenges and business challenges? And there is a model that we can use that's been developed from the enterprise space, but is obviously undergoing adaptation to the telco space, where we put in what we would call a cloud center of excellence, which is essentially the area in blue at the bottom there. And we divide that into two components. One we call infrastructure ops, and these are the guys that really understand how this cloud platform works. They're the guys that are keeping the lights on, making sure the capacity is there, monitoring it for predictive analytics or whatever. Those are the guys that really understand what the technology can do and whether you need more capacity and how you would apply it and so on. The tenant ops are more of a business function within the ops team, interfacing outwards to, in the first instance, the application owners, which is where the services might run. So we've got a structure now we can start to think about in terms of how we divide the teams up. So if we expand on that, I'm going to add one more box at the top, which is the portfolio owners, the customer care teams, other business functions that ultimately rely on what the operations teams deliver. That gives us a nice model now that we can start to think about, to say, okay, we now have a way of managing the basic infrastructure at the bottom and making sure we keep the lights on. We can coordinate, we can talk through our tenant ops teams to help them understand what is possible, so when they're having conversation with the application, or if you like the service teams, they can tell them what capacity is available, or if not, what would be needed to make it available and how quickly we could do it. And they can report back up to their portfolio owners who can say, I just need to know what margin my business is getting, and I know what my targets are, and I need to know my costs and so on. So there's a sort of chain of command, if you like, that we can start to see establishing here. So what are the sort of steps to get into this model? Well, the first thing we need to do is to put a box around those two lower components and call them ICT Operations. So this is a key fact. We need to understand that all of these services need to be developed under a single team. If you're going to get the benefit of a common physical platform running the virtualized applications, you need a common team to manage that. So the ICT team, the integrated ops team that covers the services and the underlying cloud infrastructure is key. We don't want to recreate technology silos inside the operations team. The second thing we need to start to think about are the inputs to these teams. And they're going to start to change because of the strategic impact of what operations can do in an NFV environment. The requirements given to these teams change as well. So in the past, it may have been a requirement to show a certain availability, a certain uptime, a certain throughput. Those are still going to be there. But you might also have to do a net promoter score type metric. You might be measured on how your customer satisfaction surveys look. You'll need to look at dividing up a virtual dynamic infrastructure into different costs by services, so you can report those service costs back up to the portfolio owners so they can get an understanding of their part of the business, even though their services are sharing a common platform with the rest of the applications. So the actual requirements and the business requirements that are driving the new ops team are different, and they need to be gone through and understood and worked through. The third thing we need to do is we need to have the interfaces and the processes defined between the different components. So we need to go and look at what's the application SLA that the blue box, if you like, delivers up to the application developers and the application owners. In the blue box, they only see above them workloads. Those workloads have requirements. They need throughput, they need CPU, they need storage. They don't know it's a router. They don't know it's a mobile core, right? They're just providing an infrastructure to deliver a technical requirement for an application. But they have to back that with a guarantee, because that's been sold to the applications teams, because those application teams are running your services. They are the mobile core. They are the virtual router, the virtual CPE. And likewise, they need to report that back up to the business owners. And then lastly, we need to manage skills and map the operations organization into the new structure. And there are ways of going about doing that, and there are some natural points of connectivity, if you like, here. So all large organizations will have an existing IT ops team. The IT ops team is already a long way on the journey towards the tenant ops, infrastructure ops model. So that is already, in a number of our customers, a kind of an embedded concept. But equally, it's also a journey. So we're not saying just do what you do in IT and move it across. It is an evolution, it is a progression. But the source of that skill, the understanding of how you manage a cloud environment, is usually embedded within in the IT team. So that's the first place to go look in terms of how do you fill that part of the model. Then when you look at the things like core access, the actual network services, those people, the skills there would align more towards the application side of the house and the services and the the whole services domain as opposed to the underlying infrastructure. So we can start to move those people across. And yes, it's not a one-to-one mapping, and there are definitely new skill sets to learn. And I mentioned there are a lot of new processes to think about and put in place. So the good thing about this is we are developing the model. The model is now fairly well understood. Now that we understand where we're trying to get to, we can start to put in place strategies to get there. From our perspective, we need to deliver a very good tool set. Now, fortunately, we've been developing a tool set for cloud operations for some time. So we can take that tool set pretty much as is, and within that platform layer, I'm only talking about that virtualized platform layer at this point, we could already apply a very well integrated tool set that will aid the operations admins, if you like, running the service. And the key thing about this is that because it's a very, very dynamic environment, you have to have automated processes to run it. It is not possible to do this through manual process. So we need to embrace that, and we also need to look ahead. We don't want to be fixing problems, we want to prevent problems from happening. So the sort of examples there, service quality, root cause analysis, doing smart filtering of filters when your underlying infrastructure is moving, when your workloads are moving. That gets more complex, but we can solve for that. The very fact that we can reduce the number of alerts from 90% is an indication of how many alerts can get generated from a single error. So just trying to get on top of alerting is a key requirement to go into commercial service with NFV. But better than that, we want to stop those faults from happening, and that's where the middle box comes in with effectively predictive analytics. So we can start looking at changes in the infrastructure, characteristics of storage, characteristics of CPU, maybe performance changes from applications, and we can start monitoring that and looking at it and analyzing it to say, look, it seems that this piece of storage is developing a problem. So now that we know that, we can feed that into another part of the operations process, so we can move the workloads off that piece of storage onto another piece of storage, and then we can get to the storage and take it out and do a physical swap. So if we can do the predictive analytics right, we can get to the point where we actually get very little downtime, very little outage due to faults, be they software or hardware. And that's actually a whole interesting section in itself, which we're not even going to start to cover here, which is all about how do you deliver carrier-grade services. The whole concept of what carrier-grade is starts to change when you go into a dynamic cloud environment, because you have different tools available. You don't have to use over-engineered hardware technology. You can use lower-cost technology and then policies and techniques such as predictive analytics to manage the uptime, the availability of the platform. So the whole topic of how to deliver a carrier-grade service starts to change when you go into a dynamic environment like this. And then the control and compliance. Again, it's a complex environment. It's not possible to look at this environment and say, I'm going to load this application over here. You have to have tools in place that help you understand where you're going to load applications and how you're going to load them. So if you automate the process of deployment and of moving workloads and changes to the environment, then you can ensure that they're compliant, that they're actually done right. If you do it manually, there's a possibility of you getting it wrong. So we did a demo up here yesterday, and we can repeat it on the booth out the front, where we brought up a mobile call, an operator service, and completed a VoLTE, voice over LTE call, mobile phone call. We brought the whole service up in 10 minutes. The only reason we could do that was because we've got templated ways of deploying and bringing up services and applications and interconnecting them. We're not doing it by hand. We're doing it because we've blueprinted it, we've blueprinted the design, and then we push the design down onto the infrastructure. So that's very important. And then lastly, our professional services team, who have been doing a lot of the work in trying to analyze these models and understand what the models look like. Alongside that, of course, now that we know where we're trying to get to, we can start to put services around it. So whereas those earlier implementations was very much down to our teams, our consultants working with the customer, we're now moving more towards a position where we can start to put services out there, which makes the customer's role a lot less burdensome. We can do, readiness assessments, for example. So how ready is your organization to undergo these kinds of changes? What needs to be put in place? What strategies might work for you? What sort of action plan might you take? Because we know where we're going, we can now put these services behind them and deliver some consulting to help you on this journey across. So with that, what I'd like to do, as I say, I've been talking all about the virtualization layer. That is one slice in the middle of an NFV deployment. We need to run it on some physical hardware, and we need to put services on top, and we need to manage those services. So what I'd like to do is invite the panel up to the stage here and open that conversation out a little bit. So we've got Paul from Cenex, Nadi from Gigaspaces, Cloudify, Ian from Mitel, and Marcel from Dell, which I'm hoping are going to sit in the right order. No? Okay. Well, it's kind of the right order, but it's... No, it's not. Okay, it's... So, guys, so the mic should be coming on there. So, as I say, I've talked a lot about the complexity in just modeling the cloud platform. You're going to confuse me now. This whole NFV environment is completely an ecosystem environment, right? I think we're working with great. We've got a great bunch of partners on the booth here. As we go forward, we're doing more and more with the ecosystem, and that in itself is a new way of working for many, which we'll get onto later. But maybe Ian, if I start with you, one of the things that we've sort of probably covered from what I've gone through there is we're looking at this and thinking, well, this is hard. Being dynamic is hard to do. How do you see? What experience have you got from working with your customers of how customers are overcoming the fact that this is fundamentally a very difficult shift to go from this more static, predicted environment into a very dynamic environment?
Yeah, firstly, I should probably introduce myself. I'm from the mobile division of Mitel. We're a VNF provider, essentially for VoLTE solutions, RCS messaging solutions, and EPC virtualized solutions. And dynamic is hard. It's one of the hardest things about dynamic. It's a complete change of culture for the operators. Mm-hmm. They're used to doing capacity planning on cycles. They plan a year in advance for peak year capacity. So once they go to these more orchestrated environments, it's a complete change of culture for them and the way they're actually operating the platforms. Mm-hmm. So it's a case of understanding the KPIs, having the KPIs, the integration to tools to provide the real service metrics, the metrics about service quality, service experience for the users, things that call setup times, so the orchestration layer can actually have the information required to make the decisions on capacity expansions. But dynamic is still hard culturally for them to accept, because it's such a change for them. So what we really say today is it's an evolution path to a fully orchestrated environment for the operators. Okay. So they're taking steps on a path towards that fully orchestrated dynamic environment, where they're deploying NFVs, which gives them the onboarding, the ability to run up capacity easier, to break the link between the service and the hardware. But actually going to a fully orchestrated dynamic capacity expansion is something they're probably looking at doing in 18 months or a year time frame.
Okay, so they're still on the journey to a degree. They're
still on the journey there. And part of it is the cultural change, which is also from a cost planning perspective as well, and a budgeting planning. This is all a big change within the operator. But there's other aspects to dynamic as well. One is the capacity, but it's also from a service like a core voice service. If they need to troubleshoot that service, they're used to being able to go and put a physical probe into a switch and analyze what's happening on the network. Once you go to a dynamic environment, where is the service? Where are the key servers? So they actually have to look at all their operational procedures, how to do things like troubleshooting. And so it's a large change for them when they deploy these environments. And there's multiple aspects to that dynamic.
So, Paul, I know it's an area you've looked at. Maybe if you can introduce yourself as well first. And
sure. So Paul McCluskey from CNEX. We do service assurance for hybrid networks. I had about 10 years in operations roles in a service provider. And one of the challenges has always been how you get to the root cause of a problem, fault isolation, and also understanding the impact of the fault as well. And I think we're only just getting our heads around IP and the fact that the network is dynamic, and now we've taken all of the equipment and made all that dynamic as well. So there's another layer of complexity now that operations are going to need to manage. And I think one of the challenges is nobody's switching off their physical network tomorrow. They're going to have to get the most out of those assets that have already been deployed and run those alongside the new virtualized environments. And I think if you take something like an enterprise VPN service, you could already have 1,000 sites on a customer's service, and adding new sites then aren't going to be physical devices anymore. They're now going to be a virtual CPE. How do you visualize that service topology? How do you see that service from end to end across the physical and the virtual, and still give the customer the service they're going to expect? I think those are the kind of challenges that operations are going to have to deal with going forward, and that's certainly the kind of conversation that we've been having with a number of our customers.
Do you have examples of sort of tools available for people to be able to manage that, to get that level of visibility? I mean, because that goes far beyond just knowing what's happening in the cloud platform that somebody like VMware might see. Yes. We're now talking about chaining, I guess. We're talking about linking different service nodes together.
So certainly, I think there's been a lot of focus, and I think you guys will be able to talk to this from Cloudify. I think there's been a lot of focus on how to instantiate the VNFs, how to set up the applications that are going to deliver the service. And I think the next phase we're going to get into is how do we then manage that service once it's in place. And one of the challenges is pulling in the data from all of those systems. So I think we talked about probes earlier, physical and now virtual probes also, pulling in all the performance metrics from the virtualized infrastructure, from the VNFs, and from the existing physical network as well, and then running analytics so that you can understand how the service is performing. That's a lot of work, and a lot of integration to bring that all together.
Okay, great. You mentioned Nadi. Do you want to say, if you could introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Nati Shalom, the CTO and founder for Gigaspaces for almost 16 years, so that part haven't been that dynamic. And what we're doing is basically automation orchestration for a while. I wanted to start with kind of a controversial statement that actually being static is hard, more than even dynamics, because it's not natural. When you're static, you have to think about the future all the time and kind of provision for the future, which means how do you plan capacity for something that is always moving? And I think the practices that we've built so far haven't been natural, have been taking a real world scenario and making it kind of more predictive in an environment where it's not predictive. So I think that dynamics is actually much more natural thinking than being static. And that's, I would say, the starting point. Now, bringing that to reality, the other kind of statement that I would say is that the only constant is change in that world, which means that we have to design things in a way that lives in a dynamic world and can adapt quickly. How do you do that? And I think you touched about the concept of integration. We used to think of, for example, management and automation in a monolithic way in how we manage the things, how we do monitoring, how do logging, and we build a lot of that monolithic platforms that does those monitoring, the Tivoli of the world, if you would like, the BMC of the world, and so forth. And there are a couple of other examples in that. And now we have a lot of DevOps tools, and DevOps tools are built out of toolchain, and toolchain happens to be a lot of best practices, kind of microservices for doing monitoring from the open source worlds. And the problem has shifted completely from how you do monitoring, how you do logging, how you do all those device management to a problem of integration, as you rightly pointed out. How do I integrate different elements in the infrastructure, different elements in the application stack, different open source tools, and put them together as if they were running under the same platform? So that's one aspect of which is thinking of the problem from an integration perspective, and designing that from an integration perspective means that you have that applicability already kind of built in. I think the other aspect in terms of, in reality, like if you have a legacy system and you haven't been thinking in dynamic, kind of natural way, then taking what I find to be a more pragmatic and practical step forward is to take whatever you've done today manually and just start from there. So if you have a step that says, I need to provision X amount of servers, install the software on those servers, then configure them, then plug in agents and monitoring, then plug in whatever, that is a good start. So just taking those manual steps and scripting them to a point in which they could be automated in one click of a button, it's a fairly good start. And it doesn't have to be elastic in that point. It doesn't have to be fully dynamic. It can be just dynamic in the sense that I can create clones of those environments, different size of those environments per request on demand. And I would definitely say that if you're in a very static world and you want to move dynamic, that should be your starting point. And you would be surprised that it's non-trivial to even script that part.
It's an interesting point. I mean, essentially, that what you're alluding to there, I think, is the fact that you can start this journey in steps.
Exactly.
You're not. There's a lot of talk of building entire stacks in solving every problem before you possibly even know what the problem is. Whereas actually, you can divide that problem into some little steps, start making those steps, and get experience.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the, I don't know, I call it diseases of the telco environment, that we want to specify everything and we want to go into standardization groups. And that's not the way the internet and app developers have worked. And we have to learn from them and take these steps and do what practically works. Another point I wanted to pick up on why do we need dynamism in the core network? You know, is it just a theoretical thing? And it's not. And one of the realities of modern networks is, in the past, the operator controlled the whole chain, supply chain, because they were supplying the devices. These devices were predicted, they were sold, and they could actually do this demand management to a certain extent. That is going away in the world of IP, and when they start to open up the network to microservices and app developers in the future, they're losing control of that demand chain. So they actually need the flexibility in the network to adapt to the way the networks are going to be used in the future.
Cool. And Marcel, again, if you can introduce yourself before we start,
sure.
but I mean, you're coming at this from, it all has to go somewhere, right? And it goes onto the hardware, and that's where you're looking. So,
Absolutely.
How do you see this evolving?
Well, to introduce myself, I'm Marcel Molens. I'm an enterprise technologist for the largest privately owned IT company of the world. The way that Dell is involved in this is we're a few layers below what has been discussed so far. We're at the infrastructure layer. Our focus is really around how can we develop.
Sorry, it's going late.
How can we develop infrastructure components that are manageable and scalable in the most efficient way, and we can instantly view performance and manage performance of those systems through infrastructure management as such. One of the elements we also focus on is power management of those infrastructures. A great deal of efficiency is achieved through power management. I was told yesterday that on average, an average country, 2%, over 2% of the energy consumption of an average country is actually consumed in mobile network, right? So if you consider in a journey from traditional to the new, if we can make infrastructure and help companies use infrastructure that is more power efficient and more manageable and easier to scale, that's altogether going to contribute to operational efficiency.
It's a great point, and of course that's where the hardware and the software starts to really work together. Because if we can start in the software layer, understanding that things are winding down in terms of a service load, we can start to recompose where we're running those pieces of service and start shutting down bits of hardware that aren't
Exactly.
needed.
And like another example is that this is more forward-looking. Is we see more and more companies starting to focus on acceleration technologies that we may embed in our server or infrastructure offerings that essentially can help consolidating more infrastructure into smaller size deployments. Again, saving on capital and operational cost.
Great. So I think we're going to get close to time, but I don't know if you want to cover any more. What I was going to suggest was maybe we just do the classic. We'll go down the row there and maybe get your views just in terms of your own perspective for the areas that you're focusing in. Is how do you think this is going to? What do you think the next steps are going to look like? And perhaps if you can put a time frame on things. What might we see starting to happen this year, if you like, that is sort of on the point of coming forward? How are you looking to address the market? How do you see the opportunity? Ian, do you want to?
So I think it's worth actually probably starting with what we see where we are now in terms of NFV deployments, and I would say we're in the early stages, but we are already commercially live with multi-vendor, your last category, common platform environments, where we provide software only into these environments. Now, really what we were talking about early, that's not fully dynamicized. What we've done is ease the management of that environment by taking capacity expansions from months to hours, because it's a press of the button. But there's still the traditional capacity planning going on. I think what we'll see going into 2017, 2018, is the more fully orchestrated environments where people start to orchestrate and do dynamically capacity expansion, which is actually easier than scaling in. Scaling in is more complicated because you're session state, you want to maintain calls and things like that. And so that's actually a more challenging problem from a VNF provider, because the traditional telco platforms were always designed to scale out, but not to scale in. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on, is the ability to scale in, to move VNFs from one geographic location to another, but keeping calls and the services up for the users while you're going through that. So I think we'll move to these more fully orchestrated environments, starting in 2017, going into 2018. Okay. And I think as you look to the future, especially going to 5G with network slicing and microservices, we're going to move to the real need for these common platforms to actually enable that technology and to realize on the potential for microservices and 5G network slicing.
Cool.
And I wanted to kind of take it from a different angle. There are a couple of things that we're trying to kind of revolutionize in that world. One of them is make it extremely simple. And one case that I wanted to kind of refer to that is the Orange Labs. Simple in the sense that a developer of an organization that running an IMS or virtual CPA can download software, automate it without any human touch, without talking to someone, without having to have a hand-holding. Very different experience than the way I think the industry is being driven so far, and that's kind of the DevOps world, and that's where we're heading. We also made an announcement that we actually took part of our product and made it even open governance kind of model, because what we've seen in the industry is that part of the reasons why vendors and VNF providers cannot really get to that level of automation is lack of tooling and lack of standards in that industry. So everyone had to kind of build from scratch their own tool, their own standards, so they understand TETSI and Tosca, but all of that is a spec, and relatively, I would say, rough spec. So taking something from a spec and making it a reality is a big gap. So by the fact that we can release software that will be open source, that implement that specs and make it more democratic, something that everyone can use, that's, in my view, a big step forward to actually enable a lot of those VNF providers, a lot of the carriers themselves to move on. And basically not ask that question, is dynamic, is complex, and how do you do this and how do you do that, but actually how do you get it to production? How do you actually implement the things? And I think that if we get it to be simple enough, democratic enough, consumable enough, we get to that much faster than if everyone would try to take a spec and try to implement those models themselves.
So I think just to add to that, I think we've seen virtualized EPC, I think take the sort of first steps, and that's maturing now, and virtual CPE based services now being rolled out. I think, again, baby steps, but we're moving out of those what were lab-based POCs and small trials, and now they're starting to be rolled out. I think the next step is to go beyond just delivering the service, and we're already starting to see the need for predictive analytics. So to be able to take all of the data and actually figure out ahead of time when you're going to need to scale out. So getting ahead of the curve on those kinds of operations, and then being able to set policy. So I think that's another area that's going to evolve very quickly, so that you can have complete control over all of those processes and define what the triggers are going to be for each of those. That's something that's going to come next, I think.
Cool. It sounds like it sounds like we've. Sorry, I was going to say, from listening to you all there, I get the impression that as an industry, we've moved quite a long way, and maybe we're at the point where it's going to start to accelerate a bit more as we've now kind of bedded in some of the ideas and we've got a clearer idea of where we're going. That process may start to speed up. So maybe the thing that we see in 2016 is the beginning of the acceleration of the process as we start to build out the entire platform. Great. Well, thank you very much to the panelists. We are absolutely smack on time, which is fantastic. What I'd just like to remind you, if you want to continue the conversation, it's very difficult to do a Q&A with the audience in these situations. So we thought we'd make it as easy as possible for you by providing you lunch, which is always good at an event like this. If you want to talk more to the guys here, we've got other representatives will be available as well. Please feel free to make your way across to the other side of the booth. It's pretty much the direct opposite corner from where you are now. And there's some refreshments there, and we continue conversations in a more comfortable and relaxed environment. So thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists.
Thank you.